This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton has what you need to achieve your fitness goals, no matter why you got started. Whether you're going through a tough time, whether you have strength goals, or whether you have weight goals, Peloton is the right choice. They have a variety of challenging classes for you, whether it's strength building, indoor or outdoor workouts, and everything in between. With their all-access membership, you can take your workout where you need to, and it's backed by thousands of members whose lives have been changed. Get stronger with their strength classes, workout generators, and personalized programs on the Peloton Tread and Strength Plus app. Find your push. Find your power with Peloton at onepeloton.ca.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
There will be a Game 5 in the Battle of Ontario between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Ottawa Senators. The Senators stay alive with an overtime winner in Game 4. Have to say, I'm not surprised. I had a hard time thinking this would end in a sweep, considering how well the Leafs were playing, but also how the Sens were trying to get better game by game, and how the last 3 games all ending in overtime. Pretty wild circumstances in the Battle of Ontario. What are your immediate takeaways from this series so far?
Well, Game 4 is a massive night, I think, for the Sens organization. For me, Julian, I was thinking about it sort of going to that game, and obviously this season is a success in the sense that they wanted to get back in the playoffs. They achieved that goal, had a really strong second half to get there. But I do feel like the difference, even if it ends up being a 5-game series loss, which of course I don't know if it will be, I think it's different because you've given your fans that night. Your players have gotten the experience of going through a game like that. I mean, Ottawa, had a great start, facing elimination. The first period of that game was one of their stronger periods to my eyes in the series, and they got a lead. But you know what? They gave up that lead, and they gave up another lead in the third period, and they were under real duress. And of course, they have to kill a 4-minute penalty in overtime and ultimately find a way to come out on top on a night where, after the first, the Leafs, only gave them 11 shots over the last 3 periods of the game. So, it's sort of a character testing night. Obviously, another great performance from the crowd. Like I just saw it Saturday playoffs. It was really, really good. And I do think, no matter what happens next, and I'm certainly not counting them out of the series, I just think that that's the kind of victory that makes the whole thing worth it. And then now, of course, they got a chance to really make this interesting. If they can get at least one more home game this season, this series will be, we'll have a real series on our hands if they find a way to get past Game 5 and get it back home for Game 6.
You obviously have the better perspective being in Toronto, being around fans more, being in that ecosystem more than I ever will. Like seeing a few fans, I don't sense the panic. It's only one game. I know there's a couple days in between, but if I'm a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, I'm not sweating it. I don't feel as if the players should be sweating any of this either. Of course, we're invoking some of the past playoff demons that have been around this Leafs team. How did they take that Game 4 loss?
I think everyone took it in stride. One of my observations, having covered the team for a long, long time now, and been around all those playoff series and games that they've played with this era, is they are far more businesslike, and that I'll say that even after the wins they've had, obviously emotional wins. 2 of the games in the series that the Leafs have won were in overtime. It's tough to win 3 games in a row in overtime, which was what the task that was before them in Game 4. And so, I don't think that is fully relevant yet. I guess the reason it's relevant is because I could see that changing with one more result. You know what I mean? I do think the sort of calculation changes somewhat if they've got to go back to Ottawa, and they're going to face more of those kind of questions. Everyone's going to be digging into these numbers that go back 8-9 years. And, frankly, they just are what they are in terms of the Leafs' inability to close out series with this core of players. The flip side of that is, you look at the series they won 2 years ago in Tampa, the one series win. There's only 8 players that are probably going to play in Game 5 of this series that even played that night. I mean, so, as much as the fans remember all that stuff, and obviously the a lot of the main characters, I guess I'll call it, on the Leafs, a lot of the core players have been part of it. I mean, the team certainly is different. And I think that's why they do seem so businesslike. There's a lot of experience in that group. There's a lot of guys that have, had long playoff runs, especially on the blue line. And I do think the Leafs feel good largely about the way they've played. This doesn't mean there aren't some questions the way it goes. I mean, all of a sudden you see Linus Ullmark kind of reasserting himself in a positive way in this series. It's maybe going a little bit in the other direction for Anthony Stolarz. So there's things creep in. Obviously the Sens, they get a power play goal, a shorthanded goal. They had the better of the special teams playing game 4. And that was one of the areas where Toronto had exerted itself early. So, I guess what I'm getting at is I don't think that anyone's really going there yet. Again, some fans might be, but around the team, I didn't sense that. But if they miss another opportunity to close it out in game 5, that conversation is going to get dialed up to 12 in basically a minute, almost no matter how the game goes. I mean, they could completely outplay Ottawa. They could outshoot them 40-10 and lose the game, and people will still talk about it because it's really just a matter of it's closing time, right? This is where a team with the Leafs experience, with the Leafs game breakers, with the Leafs high-end players, where they are in their careers. We're not talking, the Leafs don't have really a Jake Sanderson. Maybe the closest thing they have to him is sort of like Matthew Knies. And I'm not saying Knies will be as impactful as Sanderson's likely to be, but he's the one young guy that you're seeing sort of grow up, right? And he's had a really strong series. But the rest of these guys, this is the year to go for it. Another note too, like to have a holistic view, to sort of step out of the series just for a second. I mean, look around the league. It's a lot of 2-2 series. The Leafs were the only team that won the first 3 games of any of the series, the 8 that were played this spring. And so, I do, it's obviously a fair conversation, but I think we need to have the proper perspective too, that, it's tough to sweep a team in this league. I don't think the margins are huge between anybody. And, we'll see if they can get it done in game 5. And if not, we're going to have an interesting show on Thursday. There's going to be an interesting LFR dropped by our buddy Steve Dangle, and it's going to be a pretty panicky 48 hours, I would think, around Leafs Nation.
One game at a time. A lot of players who have come down from 3-0 would say the same thing. How's John Tavares? Took a big hit from Artem Zub in that overtime, and you wrote about it for The Athletic. Yeah,
I mean, no concrete update on him. There didn't seem to be too much concern post-game, just because he did come back, got 3 shifts in before the Senators ended that game. But look, he was gone for 10 minutes of game time in overtime. He missed the entirety of that 4-minute power play, and he's the Leafs' top scorer on power plays this year. So obviously, you know that if there's any way, shape, or form that he could play, he would have been out there in that moment. It kind of suggests a timeline. Quite honestly, this is not confirmed, but maybe it's a concussion spotter type of issue that he had to go through that kind of testing. And look, he took an arm basically up in the head area and looked like he was dazed. So that makes some sense. But, I think that it's a point of concern when you see him leave like that. Pretty vital guy. I mean, he hasn't really gotten a ton of headlines from those covering the Leafs end of this series, but I think he's been strong. I mean, he scored in 3 of the games and, has the second most shots in the series from the Leafs perspective. And as I mentioned, a big part of their power play, the power play has been a positive throughout the series, even though it didn't cash in with a chance to end the Sens season on Saturday. So, I think his status at practice Monday will be top of mind for everybody. And, if anything, I do think the 2-day break, it probably helps everybody. Like, I'm not saying one team is advantage or not, but, especially the Leafs with the way that game went, you played almost a 4th full period, after 2 previous overtime games. Even for Stolarz, right? He has not logged as many games as a lot of number 1 goalies do in the league. And he's set to make his 5th straight start. I think an extra day helps him. And then something like the Tavares situation, where, he may not be at fully 100%. I think another day before game 5 probably is a good reset for that team.
So, going into this series, I figured John Tavares would be an X factor, considering the attention that would go up to some of the Maple Leafs' best players and guys like Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. It's playing out the way I would figure with John Tavares. One other guy who, I don't watch this guy regularly like you do, but I've come away extremely impressed through these first 4 games, and he scored in game 4. Matthew Knies, what an absolute beast of a player with how he's able to get to the front of the net and create chances for himself. The breakaway he was able to get, taking advantage of a mistake between the Jake Sanderson and the Artem Zub pairing, leading to that goal. I think he's played really well throughout this series. What say you?
Well, boy, it's a good time to be negotiating a new contract, which he's set to do on the other side of the season, or at least his agent on his behalf. And you know, the good thing for Knies is I think last year in the playoffs, he elevated for the Leafs. He scored an overtime winner in that series against Boston. You started to see him use that size in a way that, you know, within the legal bounds of the game, but to really, you know, be a difference maker out there. He's kind of funny to say because he is so big. He's so strong. I think that he's had to really realize at times, like, he is bigger and stronger than most of the other guys on the ice, and that he can, you know, push his way through and bull his way through. And, you know, you even saw he took a moment. It was a 46-second shift he had where he scores that goal. And you know, Zub and Sanderson, I think, got crossed up a little bit. He tossed it into space, got a step on them, and managed to finish up high. So, you know, I think the Leafs are thrilled with his progression. And the fact that now it's 2 years in a row in the playoffs where he seems to even maybe be finding almost another gear. I mean, those are all encouraging signs. And he had a really good season, you know, planned for the Leafs this season as well. So, you know, quickly, you know, I don't know if the core gets, there's a lot of numbers with this core 4, core 5, core 22. I don't know, but Matthew Knies is certainly an important part of the Leafs' future. And, you know, I think he's really making his presence felt in a positive way in this series, which is, it's important, right? The Leafs are like a lot of the teams that we've seen age out. I'm looking at the Bruins, right? Even Edmonton now, you know, they're still very much alive in the playoffs, but they don't have a lot of younger talent coming. I mean, it's nice for the Leafs because they've traded so many picks to actually have one of the guys they drafted, a second round pick, no less, you know, come up and now like clearly be an impact type of guy on the roster. So, you know, he's massively valuable. You know, I think there's probably going to be a lot of talk about Matthews and Marner heading into Game 5 from the Toronto end. You know, but if you look at the line that they play on with Knies, they haven't been scored on at 5-on-5 in the series. They're the only line in the series that can say that. You know, maybe you're probably looking for a little more offense if you could, if you're being a little greedy from either Matthews or Marner at even strength. But, you know, that line isn't giving up too much when they're out there, and they have all those players have scored some big goals, and especially Knies, you know, gave them a chance to win Game 4 and make it a sweep.
100%. We should go to the Sens' perspective of this too. You briefly mentioned Jake Sanderson. In this market in Ottawa, we've seen him take this step. We expected it would be the case, but to see him actually do it is a whole other thing. And for him to score that overtime goal, he sees that as like probably the best moment of his career to this point. And that's just another hallmark moment in what's been a breakout year for him. The career year in terms of points, playing for Team USA at the Four Nations and scoring in that championship game against Team Canada. And then that overtime winner where, yes, he gets the goal, getting it through traffic. I still think the most impressive part of that play is him darting from the bench, skating all the way towards the corner of the ice, saving that puck from going out of the offensive zone, and then taking that shot. It's a heck of a play from Jake Sanderson. From what you've been able to watch of him in this series, what have been your impressions?
Yeah, it's to keep it at the line, but it's also how quickly he released the puck, because he did that before the Leafs could clog up the shooting lanes and before Stolarz could get set. And obviously there's a bit of good fortune, I guess, that the puck goes through all those bodies and finds the net. But I mean, we're watching enough hockey games right now. I mean, that's how the goals are going in. The hardest thing, quite frankly, because the Leafs have blocked so many shots in this series, is you know, feathering a shot like that and getting it through. And I think because of how he held the line and the way he shot it, I mean, full marks there. You know, really impressive guy. And, you know, I think he ended up over 30 minutes in that game. You know, that's not something that's going to happen too often in the regular season. Like it's something like that I do feel like no matter what happens, the Sens can start to feel good about this whole experience in this season. You know, him experiencing the level, and you're right, he gets the taste at the Four Nations, and then, you know, just seeing where it's at, and really, because he's going to be a top defenseman in the league, like he's going to be the guy logging 30 minutes when these games get like this, like year after year after year. That's going to be the expectation. And, you know, so I think you can watch it on TV. I think you could sit in the press box like us. You could think about being in the playoffs, but obviously the actual experience of being on the ice, seeing how physical it is, just seeing how the level of intensity, the desperation, what all those words goes up for everybody, and then for him to build his own confidence within that is what an experience for him and for the Senators. And so, yeah, he's been good. Clevin has been impressive in the series. I know he's starting to get a little bit of love, and he made a play before that overtime winner, getting the puck around from the other side of the ice there, and gaining the zone initially. So I do think, I can't remember the stat, but I did have it at one point. The Leafs literally have thousands of more games of NHL experience on their blue line, but this is the beauty. The Clevins, the Sandersons, these guys are going to. They're going to be better for this, even if it ends up being kind of a quick experience, and maybe it won't. And maybe they come back in the series, and then we're talking about a whole new ball game. I mean, that's the beauty of the playoffs. They're writing their own story, and the story that Jake Sanderson wrote on Saturday was a pretty good one.
For sure. And I'm glad you mentioned Tyler Clevin, because one thing I definitely got wrong in my own little internal pre-assessment of this series, I thought that third pairing with Tyler Clevin and Nicholas Montempallo would be essentially food for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And while that pairing has been sheltered throughout this series, I think Tyler Clevin, in terms of how he's handled himself against opposition, how he's gone about handling the puck. You mentioned that play leading to the Sanderson goal where he enters the offensive zone, almost gets a goal past Anthony Stolarz, rings the puck around before it gets to Sanderson. I think he's shown some pretty good stuff throughout these first few games in this series. I see a couple fans saying, hey, is he a top four guy? I don't think we need to go that far with him. I think right now at his development, he's faring very well as a third pairing defenseman.
Right. And that sometimes that'll come and go, right? I mean, it feels to me in the league, like there's certain players that are like clearly number ones or clearly number twos and they play in your top pair. But there's a lot of fluidity between second and third pairing defensemen on most teams, especially when you factor in injuries and all the things that happen in a season. Look no further than the Leafs. I mean, Oliver Ekman-Larsson at times was a second pair guy this year. Today's on what's the third pair. At the same time, the Leafs are a team that play their pairings pretty evenly, or they have so far in the series. So what's even the difference if you're basically just rolling the three? I don't think you have to classify it. And you're right, especially with someone that young. Just see, can he find ways to get better? Can he keep pushing his own game further along? I mean, he's such a big man, and I think that you're feeling good about the strides he's taken. If anything, might be the Jensen-Shabbat pairing that at times the Leafs have, I think, exploited a little bit. And I don't know. I mean, Nick Jensen, I noticed he's not on the ice very much. I put my foot in it on Twitter earlier in the series with that one. But, maybe he's not at 100%. Obviously, they're asked to do a lot, too, with some of the high-end, offensive players the Leafs have. But this has been a pretty even series, too. Any way you slice it. I do think, while we could say, oh, these games went to overtime and maybe it should be 2-2 or whatever, I think the Leafs have earned having an edge because I think they've had enough important edges, like the goaltending over 4 games, the special teams over 4 games. But as I say, some of those things are now swinging back Ottawa's way. And that's why, to me, Game 5 is fascinating because there's no guarantee what we've seen continues. And maybe Ottawa keeps building its game up and comes out and takes some of those areas back, and then all bets are off. So it's probably best for hockey that this thing's going at least 5 and perhaps longer. I actually bumped into an agent at the airport flying back this morning, and he's like, more HRR for everybody. It's good that there's more games in Toronto because all the money that is generated in the playoffs goes into a collective pool. It's good for everyone. And honestly, looking at the first round, it looks like we're going to have a bunch of Game 7s. So more HRR for everybody, pal.
Yeah, hopefully it just trickles down. Just continue to trickle down to little people like us somehow. I will say this. I look at Game 5 as a big game that needs to be had for Linus Ullmark. I think in this series, I think it's been pretty easy to say Anthony Stolarz has been the better goalie in totality in this series when you look at him and you look at Linus Ullmark. I think Linus Ullmark has incrementally gotten better And I think game 4 was his best game of the series. And that's not just because he won. I think he made some big saves when the team needed him to. Tough on some of the goals that he allowed. I wouldn't necessarily characterize them all as his fault, but you need him to make saves in those moments. But this team the Senators haven't had him steal a game in this postseason just yet. What a time it would be if game 5 ends up being that game.
For sure. And look, this is for him, I think changing some of his own playoff narrative is positive too, because he had lost games in Boston in the playoffs. That this series started, he loses the first 3, and particularly the first one, didn't go so well clearly. So, at the start of a big contract, and clearly the Senators have placed a lot of faith and hope into him. I mean, if we had $1 for every time someone pointed out he won a Vezina, we'd have a few bucks to buy a Starbucks, because I've heard that a few times in the Senators room. But I mean, it's a point well made. It's just saying that, look, he's a proven goaltender, and the goaltending in this playoffs has been kind of strange. Like, some of the best goalies in the league are the guys that are at the bottom of, goals saved above expected. Kemper's down there. Hellebuck, which I'm sure we'll get to, had his share of ups and downs, being pulled twice already in the Winnipeg St. Louis series. Aiden Hill's numbers aren't sparkling. Ullmark, I'll put it the same. I mean, and some of those goalies, obviously, and Aiden Hill won a Stanley Cup in Vegas not so long ago, and Kemper won one in Colorado. So, you're dealing with small sample sizes in the playoffs, which I think it can be the tricky thing, because the small sample size can be going against you. But unlike the regular season, you might not get enough games to make that, save percentage get back to a respectable number. That's kind of where Ullmark's at, is because the Leafs didn't have a ton of shots, but they were putting a lot of pucks behind him early in the series. So you're right. It would be a grand night for him, because I think it's fair to assume, with the game being in Toronto, that the Leafs are probably going to put a lot of pressure on him early. I'm sure they're going to be wanting to get shots to the net, get their building and fans into it. Almost try to stomp out the Senators' belief as quickly as possible. And so, how Ullmark looks in those moments. I mean, the 2 games played in Scotiabank Arena in the series, he let in goals in the first couple minutes, right? And it's not to say they're entirely on him. There's a team around him, and there was some bounces involved. One went off Riley's skate, if I'm not mistaken, in game 2. But point being, you're right. This is the time where you almost don't want to be, there's no excuses. Just like, if he can keep the puck out, if he can help build the confidence of his teammates. I mean, that's part of the recipe here that the Senators are going to try to cook up to make, to come back and make some history.
Okay, one more question about Leaf Sens. How closely will you be looking at warmups for game 5? Will it be any closer to what you had to do for game 4?
I should have been watching closer in game 3, evidently, but I certainly will be. I'll be watching. I mean, you've seen it in some of the other series. This one, there's definitely been some animosity in the series. Not a whole lot that's like truly crossed the line. Maybe little snippets, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm thinking of the cross check on Tavares in game 1. Then you have Stolarz hacking several times Ridley Gregg. The Zub hit on Tavares maybe over. But the point is this. I think it's possible some of that energy goes to another level. And given that one team in this series has been fined $25,000 and one player in this series has been fined $2,080 or whatever it was that Nick Cousins got fined for shooting the pucks. I mean, yeah, I'll look over. I mean, it's all gamesmanship. It's funny how that story was. Like, a lot of people, the teams themselves didn't seem to think it was that big a deal. The league took the view it did, and obviously that's why the fines came down to make sure that it didn't become something that escalates. But I don't expect any funny business in warmups, but we got to be watching now. I mean, it's part of one of the storylines, the undercurrents of the series.
I get that it was deserving of coverage. I think you did a great job in getting coverage of that story at The Athletic. Mark Masters got a lot of laughs in the media room in Ottawa asking Travis Green about that. We're just talking about a couple pucks that were lobbed towards a goalie. The two of them won a cup together. They're friends. I think it was just completely overblown. And I think the fact the Senators were fined $25,000 for it, I think that's a bit much. And if we're going to start getting to a point where we're going to start over policing that stuff, like, I mean, obviously you don't want people to really lose their minds over that type of stuff and get into full on fights in warm up. But like, I was watching the Canadians Capitals game, at least the start of it on the Sunday tonight on Sunday as we're recording. And our Bergerac guy like taps Alexander Ovechkin in the middle of warm up. Is he going to get fined too? Is that something we're going to have to worry about as well? I don't want to have to get to a point where we're going to start overlooking all of these warm ups for small little innocuous things. What are we really doing here? These are grown ups who understand that all of the fighting and all of the bickering, all you need to do in a playoff game happens in the playoff game, and all of the little infighting stuff, whatever you want to call it, that's just part of the entertainment. And I don't think Nick Cousins did anything that bad to generate that type of reaction. That's my mini rant on that.
Yeah, I don't feel as strongly about it as you. I mean, I think that, look at the fine and stuff. I don't really like, I'm not advocating. I'm not saying we need to, like, maybe this could have just been ended with a phone call is kind of my point. But I do think it needed to be addressed.
Sure.
Not because I think it was this grand, terrible thing, but I do believe that it's something done to try to piss someone else off, and it's not supposed to be done. And the next thing that person might do back or that team might do back, we might all agree should be worth a big fine. And so I like how the league chooses to stomp it out. I'm open to you because I'm not sitting here saying the Senators should have to pay some big fine. I actually wonder, honestly, this is a bit of an aside, if they actually pay the fine. Like, I think sometimes those fines are like, I don't know if money necessarily changes hands. I think it goes both ways sometimes. Sometimes it's sort of like, hey, here's the fine if this happens again. And if not, it's like putting someone on probation kind of. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's more just to say, I do think it needed to be addressed in some way. Because clearly someone was bothered by it. I'm not at the bottom of who did what or who complained, but somebody brought the attention to that. I just have to believe it because, I was actually in the building, as were you. I am watching warm up broadly. Now, to be fair, a lot of things are happening in warm up. You've got like 45 players on the ice, all going through different individual routines, skating in circles. Obviously, they eventually do line rushes or shooting pucks. So it is easy to miss something, but I talked to a few of the Leafs players quietly about this, and they didn't realize anything had happened until it already blew up in the media. So it wasn't so egregious that the whole Leafs were seething in the moment. Anyway, it got us through a day of storylines, my friend. It did become a sideline topic, and I'm with you in the spirit of saying, like, I don't care so much with the fines, but the league can't just sit here, nor should they with Jack Guy. I mean, you might have saw it when he was coming back out in the third period. The referee of the game 4 on Sunday, like, made him get away from the Capitals bench. Like, I think that they're sensitive to, they're trying to. Hockey's always in a funny spot. Undoubtedly, the emotion, the passion, and sometimes the incidents are what make us love the sport. But they're always trying to keep somewhat of a bottle cap on it. But then they're also shaking up the pop bottle at the same time. So we're always in a funny spot with this sort of stuff. Because if the playoffs didn't have all this emotion and all this going on, I don't think it would be quite the same. Like, I was watching a Canadiens game when Wilson and Andersen ended up on the bench. And I was pumped up watching that. Like, again, I've told you this. I admit that I do occasionally like a bit of Neanderthal hockey within, but I just love seeing the excitement around all that. Look at the 21,000 people at the Bell Center. Didn't seem like they minded it too much either. Fortunately, no one got hurt. But it's a long way of saying some of this is what makes the game so great this time of year. But the league doesn't need any more two-handers to the head or some of the big bad issues of 20 and 30 years ago need to remain there.
This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Silver Wax. With the right tools, cleaning your car really doesn't take all that long, and Silver Wax is definitely the right tool. Proudly made right here in Canada and proudly Canadian since 1999. That's not about to change. Cleaning is only a hassle if you make it. Silver Wax formulas do the cleaning for you, and their pro-grade tech has been fine-tuned to do the job right. Their absolute care promise drives Silver Wax to make caring for your car as easy as a Sunday drive. They've spent years fine-tuning the products, whether it's the ceramic quick wax. They've also got an insect remover as well. A lot of great stuff you have to check out for your car. Silver Wax is the product for you. Silver Wax takes absolute care of your car, and you can find Silver Wax products at your local Canadian Tire or silverwax.ca. Use promo code SDPN10, SDPN10 at checkout to save 10% off your next order. That's SDPN10 for 10% off your next order at Silver Wax. I love the transition over to the Canadiens Capitals series. 3-1 in favor of the Washington Capitals right now, after they won on Sunday night over the Montreal Canadiens. But the biggest thing, obviously, from that series is that fight, that Wilson-Andersen scuffle on the bench. A linesman gets involved. I have a very complicated relationship with fighting. I understand the complications with it, with head trauma, and how ultimately I think we're still going to be at a point where it'll get phased out. We're already seeing it in junior leagues. There's a whole nuanced discussion to be had about fighting in the sport. But damn it, when I saw that fight go down on TV, I was like, ooh, they getting it in over there. I got excited. There's no way you can stop yourself from being excited about those crazy moments, right? I openly acknowledge that my feelings are very complicated when I see a fight like that come out of nowhere and the craziness endures the way that it has. Between that and the 3 fights in 9 seconds at the Four Nations, my views on fighting have been very tested these last few months.
Right. And look, I'll say this, one of the great things with the playoffs, there really isn't that much fighting. Like it's pretty rare if you look at it. I don't know how many fighting majors we've had this playoffs, but it's not a lot from the games I've been watching anecdotally. So it's not really part of the sport at this time of year. I think the consequences are too high. The risks are too high. And it's happened in isolated incidences and gone down as the stuff of legend, having a Gidlin-LeCavalier fight, for example, in a Stanley Cup final, the 2 captains of the teams, but yeah, it's, look, there's emotion there that, I have to think some of it is, look, it's what Tom Wilson is. It's what Josh Anderson is. Both are big guys, both skate well, throw punishing checks, and like to try to unset their opponent in any way, shape, or form. So it's kind of only natural that they would come together. And then it just, it got a little over the top there, heated, and interesting series. I think those games being in Montreal probably lends itself to that. Washington's a great crowd too, but the Bell Center is like having a moment. It's great at the best of times anyway. But I think that there's sort of an affinity being built here with the current version of the Canadiens team that's coming up, all these young, exciting players, and the fans are gravitating to it. Even just seeing the number of people in the streets for these games outside, watching kind of in the plaza there. It's something special going on. And so that building's loud on a Saturday in October. It's at another level when you get to the playoffs now. So, going to be tough for the Canes to come back in that series. Was surprised to see Logan Thompson healthy enough to play Game 4 for the Canadiens after seeing him barely be able to put any weight on his lower body after leaving the game injured in Game 3. But that the conversation in Montreal is going to be not unlike Ottawa, where they're going to say find a way to get one road win and you get at least one more game back at the Bell Center and have a chance to make things more interesting.
Yeah, I'm with you on the Logan Thompson discussion, by the way. I thought with what happened with him and his leg, I thought, okay, we might not see him the rest of this series, and it was going to come down to Charlie Lindgren. So to see him in Game 4, I was very surprised about that. And then at the other end, Samuel Montembeault not able to go, Jakub Dobeš taking his place, and Caden Primo was also called up before the game as well for reinforcements. Look, Sam Montembeault has meant as much as he's meant to this Canadiens team. He was on that Four Nations team as well. Putting it in the hands of Jakub Dobeš the rest of the way, if it gets to that point, it could be a little dicey for the Canadiens.
Yeah, but give Dobeš credit. He won 5 games in a row at one point this season. He played a role in them making the playoffs, right? He won some big games for them. I'm with you. It doesn't. If all things being equal, you want a fully healthy roster and you want your number one goalie. There's no way around that fact. But we've seen teams in the past go on runs with unlikely players playing a role in it. And I think if you're on the Montreal side, you just have to believe Dobeš is a younger goalie. and you're trying to find your way through with him. But it feels so open in the league right now. It just feels like this. I think most of us probably picked Washington in that series. I don't recall what your pick was. So maybe it's going to end up the way a lot of people thought. But, the Canes have thrown some doubt into it. When you think of, pushing the game to overtime in Washington, winning game 3, had a chance in game 4. Like they're right there in the series. In a lot of ways, sort of like the Sens with the Leafs. Like, it's funny how those are two parallels. I mean, two younger teams getting a taste of this and pushing teams that are having probably a little higher expectations placed on them, giving them their money's worth, even while down 3-1 and facing elimination in the next couple of days.
Knowing that this podcast will come out Monday morning for everyone to listen, as of now, I am not in my colleague Arpin Basu's head, but I am willing to put money whatever article he writes on Monday will have everything to do with the goals that involve the following people: Juraj Slafkovsky, Ivan Demidov, Lane Hudson, and Cole Caulfield. Because as you mentioned, the fact that Canadiens fans are developing this affinity with this team, it has everything to do with the qualities that they've shown, particularly offensively, in players like those 4. And of course, you have to include Nick Suzuki in that bunch as well. The Canadiens have accumulated some good talent up front, which a lot of fans have been starving for years with this organization. To see that Slafkovsky goal in particular, with Demidov playing that role, leading to that goal happening from Slafkovsky, like that, if you're a Canadiens fan, maybe your team doesn't win this series, but that's a glimmer of hope you hang on to for the summer and beyond.
Yeah, especially because it had been a bit of a quiet series for Demidov until that point. That was his first assists point of the series in game 4. But man, what a move he made, and a confident move, holding onto the puck, going around the net, finding Slafkovsky on the other side, and forcing Thompson to move across his crease. And that opened up a hole for Slafkovsky to bury the shot. So, it was a really nice play, and one that would have pulled you out of your seats if you were in the arena there. And I'm with you. The vibes are high. They should be high, right? Like this might be the last year in both Ottawa and Montreal where playoffs are kind of fun. And I mean that they're still fun after that, but when you're supposed to win, or when you're, when it's just thought that things should go a different way, it doesn't always go your way, and they become far more stressful experiences as a fan. But, both teams kind of are in a house money situation. Both teams have achieved the aims they were talking about on the first day of training camp in September. And as the year got going, both teams didn't have a straight line to the playoffs. They had to win a lot of games down the stretch to make it happen. And we're kind of, around the Christmas period, it wasn't totally sure. I know the Sens went into the holiday break, on a red hot run, but it wasn't completely clear at that point that both would get into the playoffs. And so, I would just say enjoy it out there if you have emotional fan investment in either place, because I promise you, and I don't mean it'll be bad, but it will just get way more stressful down the road when you get into matchups that you expect to win, and you're probably not going to win them all. Just how it goes. Unfortunately, you got pretty good teams, and I don't see a lot of margin between the teams in the league right now, to be honest. A lot of question marks even among the best teams, and then you throw injuries and unpredictability in, and this is shaping up to be a hell of a playoffs.
For sure. Also, if I know Canadiens fans well enough and Senators fans well enough, I think they should be in agreement with you. I think as of next year, you're starting to think, hey, like, how do you stay in the playoffs? And you're very much looking at your respective Puckpedia pages and reminding yourself when those contracts of your best young players expire, or whatever RFA situation is there, because you're going to hear the word competitive window a lot over the next couple of years.
Well, that's part of it. And honestly, maybe next year they're playing in round 1, and both fan bases are thinking this is the year we got to win a playoff series, and there's only one playoff series to be won. I mean, that tends to be how it goes. And, we've just seen enough teams where, I think of the Capitals for a long time before they won their cup. The Leafs are a more recent example. Even Tampa, Boston, like those teams had 2 crazy regular seasons and then lost in the round 1. I mean, playoffs will break your heart, but I feel like there's no heartbreak on the table really for a Sens or Canadiens fan in the same way, because it's just so nice to, how can you not enjoy this? These games have been great.
I imagine it could be a different scenario if you're a Winnipeg Jets fan. You win your first 2 games of your series, and now the series is tied against the St. Louis Blues. And not only is it tied, Connor Hellebuyck, an MVP favorite, the likely Vezina Trophy winner, pulled from the net in both of the last 2 games for the Winnipeg Jets. How concerned should the Jets be about Connor Hellebuyck's performances in recent games?
I think they should be concerned about their team performances, and he's a huge part of the team, right? And that's not to absolve him, but to me, they're losing the battle around the net. And a lot of the goals that are getting behind Hellebuyck are on screens and tips and chaos at the goal. I don't think that's a recipe to beat Connor Hellebuyck. I think that's a recipe to beat any goaltender on earth. As I say, you see those types of goals in other series. There's the goals in the Toronto Ottawa series in overtime. They're nice because players had to make nice plays, but they're not nice goals. They're these sorts of pucks going in. And I think with Hellebuyck specifically, clearly, I think most goalies, but especially someone as good as him, if he's set to a shooter and he sees the shot, he's going to stop that at such a high percentage of the time. That's how he has the numbers he has, right? And that's why I think he deserved to get the Hart consideration that he got this season. The flip side of that is in the playoffs, he doesn't see all the shots, and there's more bounces and there's more things going on. And, he's also has his own past here that somewhere, look, he's elite at what he does. So I think to play a goal, to be a goaltender that reaches one of the best in the league for as long as he's been, you have to find a way to get past bad moments, because you're not supposed to let any goals in, technically speaking, and the best let goals in. But I just think that this is very concerning. And the fact that the Blues are able to, create so much havoc around him. I don't know if there's something that could be tweaked in a playoff series. It might be too tall a task, but to try to, box that out, block more pucks, just try to keep the traffic and the dangerous chances to a minimum. And then, of course, you just hope he can fight through it and find his best game. But, that series feels like 7. Been a total home series so far with the 2 wins by the Jets in Winnipeg and the 2 wins by Blues in St. Louis. And there's going to be a lot of talk about Hellebuyck now until the next game. And that's kind of what it is. And, he's got to find a chance to shift those conversations to wow, he fought through that. And, he had a great performance in game 2 of the series, for example. There's some people talking about him in game 1. If he can deliver another one in game 5, and maybe the conversation will shift a little bit again.
I know at least one person asked it for AskCJ. I wanted to bring it up in our discussion anyway. I know what my answer is. Who are you starting in game 5 if you're the Winnipeg Jets?
Hellebuyck all day long.
There you go.
It's funny because I lean towards the quicker goalie switch than maybe a lot of teams would. I think in the playoffs, it made sense. And I'm not just saying this in reverse. To be clear, we're recording this before game 4 of Edmonton, LA. So I don't know how that one went, but I like that they went to Pickard for game 3. I think you have to do it quickly if you have any doubts about your main goalie, because if you wait too long, it's almost too little too late. But in this case, I think certain players are almost exempted from that kind of conversation. And, unless Hellebuyck's dealing with something we don't know about physically, absent that, and we don't have that information, I would say you've just got to run with him. You've got to believe in him, and you've got to make sure your team is creating an environment around him and in front of him that can allow for more success. Because I do see this as not just a Connor Hellebuyck problem. I think it's a defensive zone problem for the team, but he's potentially the MVP of the league this season. You don't make excuses for someone who plays at that level, but in terms of ensuring it doesn't happen again, I don't think the answer is to have him eating hot dogs at the end of the bench. I think it's to put him back in there and play in a style and have a level of commitment that, find some answers in your structure or in the way you're deploying the players to make it a little bit more comfortable for him, because again, if he sees the shots, if he's square to the shots, if you're, keeping players to the outside and he's going to stop 92% or above of those shots, which should be good enough to win the game.
All right. I want to just get some quick hits on some of the other series that are happening. Just really quickly with Florida and Tampa. When you see that Paul Maurice and John Cooper are going at it, they have their little war of worlds. I know for me, I have a little bit of FOMO, even though I have nothing to do with those teams. It would be super fun to cover the back and forth between those two guys. And of course, what's happening on the ice as well. What do you make of what's going on in that series between those two?
Yeah, only applies to reporters, but it's an all quote series, right? When you have Maurice and Cooper, speaking to you every day. I mean, both have such a unique way of describing the game, of putting the sword in a little bit on the other side or the needle in a little bit. I absolutely loved Cooper saying the exact same quote that Maurice had given after Matthew Tkachuk laid out Jake Guentzel at the end of game 4 or game 3 rather there. But yeah, look at that series it's probably more deserving of the Battle of label than the Battle of Ontario has been. I think the Battle of Florida has been a little bit more of a battle. And part of it is just look at the guys in the game. I mean, you got the Bennett's and Marchands and even Tkachuk, obviously, Guentzel's a battler, Point's a battler. Like Kucherov isn't afraid of some of the mystic arts on the ice that aren't just the magical things you can do with a stick to set up teammates or score goals. And those teams have played a lot in the last few years as well. And I think both of them have legit reason to believe they could go on a cup run this spring. So that series has been, it's already had a suspension, that the Hagel hit on Alexander Barkov. They didn't give one out for Tkachuk on Guentzel, primarily because there's no head contact on the play and it was deemed not to be as violent as some other hits that are interference plays that rise to the level of supplemental discipline. But that sets up kind of an interesting game 4 because you have Hagel back in the game and you've got Matthew Tkachuk still in that game for the Florida side. And you might remember, you referenced earlier the 3 fights in 9 seconds. Those two came together on one of those fights. Not saying it will be repeated, but be interested to know what kind of conversation they have or how that goes. But pretty feisty series so far. And, the best stuff is, as good as it is on the ice, some of the best stuff is happening in the media room or at the podium when the coaches are speaking.
The only players we hit are the ones with pucks. It's been fun to hear that quote go back and forth between John Cooper and Paul Maurice. While we stay in the East, any quick thoughts on Carolina, New Jersey?
Well, New Jersey's really on the ropes, but maybe the biggest development might be Frederik Andersen, leaving the game after having Timo Meier crash into him in game 4, just because obviously Carolina, and we'll see how serious that could be for Andersen, but he's a goalie that's had a lot of issues over the years with his health, his knees in particular, but even in neck injuries. I don't know the nature of what he's dealing with, but if he has to miss any amount of time, that just could change the fortunes of the Hurricanes somewhat as they plow on. But I just think the Devils are climbing up too big of a mountain with all the players they have out. It's tough. I didn't give them much of a chance, if you recall, in the series to begin with, and nothing I've really seen has changed my view of that, other than as saying, let's see where it ends up with the Hurricanes goaltending. But I do think that Carolina's in a good spot to finish that one off, get some rest, and maybe that'll help a player like Andersen get back in the net quickly.
Okay, let's get to Colorado and Dallas. Gabriel Landeskog returning, scoring in the playoffs. That series is tied. That series might actually live up to the billing that we set for it at the beginning of the postseason. But before we we give a comment or two in total of that series, can we just talk about the fact that it's so good to see Gabriel Landeskog back?
Well, what a hair-raising, hair on your arms here, moment that was. What an electric goal to do it at home. His first shot of the series, actually didn't get a shot in the first game he played in his return. And what's kind of interesting is that he's been elevated into the top 6. He's back on the top power play, 3 years out of the league. And somehow he's just back in an impact role. And look, it's not because it's a team without players that can fill those spots. The the Avalanche are deep, right? Like they added Martin Necas and Brock Nelson and Charlie Coyle. Plus they have Nichushkin, McKinnon, Makar. Like they're a wagon the way they're built. And so the fact that he's immediately hanging with those guys is impressive. Really happy for him. You can see what it means to him, what it means to the city, but like, I don't think any of us can really put ourselves in his position. Like 3 years is a long time to just be skating on your own, to be seeing specialists, to be getting a lot of bad news, quite frankly, either bad news delivered to you by the specialists or doctors, or just bad news that your body is giving you when you go on the ice and you don't feel right. And you're trying to, like, he was doing all that with a huge amount of uncertainty that he'd never play again. And so, you know, I hope that we're not talking about him getting injured again at some point, but, you know, even to just get that moment to be jumping right in the playoffs with this team. I mean, this looks like it's going to be the kind of series finally that it was discussed ahead of time. I know there was some concern about that because some of the individual games have been sort of one-sided, but when you step back and look at the 4 games, it's like, okay, it's 2-2. That sounds right. And can someone win 2 games in a row? Like, it's possible, but it's going to be tough. So very likely headed to a 7th game. I mean, this thing has like 7th game overtime kind of vibes, I would say, for the Avalanche Stars. And so I'm just, it's cool that he can be a part of that he's having big moments. And I'm a little blown away that he's been leaned on as heavily as he had been. Like part of me was wondering this when we were, you know, it was sort of becoming clearer and clearer he was likely going to play again. But I was thinking maybe he comes back and he's almost sort of just a 4th liner. He's a little bit of a vibes guy at that point, and then, you know, can give you some safe minutes down the lineup. But, you know, he's been much more than that to start. And it's only 2 games, so I don't want to raise the expectations too high for him. But man, you start to think like he can have a meaningful impact on this playoff run. And imagine if he goes from one cup win to another team that goes on a cup run, like with no games played in the meantime. Now, I mean, what a story that would be. But they got to get by the Stars first, and that's no guarantee.
Absolutely not. But for the Avs, at least they were able to even it and even chase Jake Ottinger from game 4. It's always surprising considering how stacked both teams are to see one team just run away with it, even if it's just one game. We know how momentum doesn't always translate to the next game, but I was able to catch like the end of that game while I was riding up off the Leafs Sens game, and just the constant shots from the ESPN broadcast to Jake Ottinger just sitting on the bench, just like, wow, just seeing him in that spot. Like, that's not something you always expect.
No, but, you know, I didn't mind Pete DeBoer's reasoning there. They just didn't feel like it was a night the team was playing well enough in front of him. Like, why subject him to maybe letting in 6 if the team isn't playing well in front of him? And why not buy him a little bit more rest? I'm sure, you know, I don't know how Jake Ottinger felt about it because, you know, we've seen Andrei Vasilevsky, for example, in Tampa, like basically refused to come out of the net. And he's had some playoff games where he let in 7, but he just does not want to be replaced. But from a practical standpoint, I don't think it's the worst thing to be honest about where the team is at and to try to buy someone like that just an opportunity to start the reset a little sooner because the Avalanche, when they're going, they're like a freight train. You know, they play at such a high rate of speed. They can just overwhelm you line. Like Charlie Coyle's their 3rd line center. I mean, what a season their front office had to make the acquisitions they did. And then they add Landeskog off IR and they're probably the favorite. I mean, they were at the top of the contender tiers that we did before the playoffs at the Athletic. And looking at everything that's happened so far, I would still list them as the number 1 favorite to go and win a Stanley Cup this spring.
One more thing before we get to Ask CJ. Any quick thoughts on a series that I also think might end up going 7, Minnesota and Vegas? That series tied at 2. Big overtime win for Vegas in game 4.
You know, the Wild have their own demons. Like we were talking about the Leafs a little bit. They had a chance to go up 3-1. And that, I just wonder how quickly they can put that aside. Now they get a 2-day break in their series, which helps. I think just the mental reset is sort of a day off, then get back to a practice day and just move on. I mean, the playoffs come with all kinds of different emotions, but it's hard not to wonder like what could have been if they just found a way to either hold on to lead or score a goal in overtime in game 4 themselves. And, you know, they've led a number of series. I don't have the exact stat in front of me, but they've lost a lot of series in the last 8-9 years where they actually had a lead and they were ahead 2-1 in this one, with a chance to go up 3-1. So, I think I underestimated personally how impactful getting Kaprizov back would be. It's not that I forgot how great he was. I don't know that I had the highest expectations for his ability to perform, after having the long layoff that he did, for injury. Also getting Eriksson Ek back is huge. Someone they use as a matchup centerman. Matt Boldy's taken a step. He's had a really strong playoffs for Minnesota. They've got a good goaltender. I mean, they have the elements of a team that probably shouldn't have been slept on as much as they were, most notably by your trusted man behind the microphone here. So I'm mea culpaing that one because I didn't expect it to be such an entertaining series. And the Wild, now for me, the big test is, can they just push off any thought of disappointment from playing well and not getting a result that they probably could. They definitely had a potential win in their hands that would put them up 3-1, and they saw it slip away. And so it would be an upset still if Minnesota could win it, but the gap between the teams isn't as pronounced as I was expecting.
Yeah, I think I disrespected the Minnesota Wild a little bit too, even though I know what they can do defensively as well, and I've seen it when they just in some of the play that I've been able to watch from them this year. But yeah, having Kaprizov back, having Eriksson Ek back, that makes a world of a difference for that team. At the very least, I just hope they go to 7.
I talked to someone today who watches the league closely and works in the league and said it's his opinion Kaprizov's a top 7 player in the world. And, I'm not saying that that's 100% true. I mean, but if that's true, you start to realize, the game breakers to me have been kind of there's two sort of sets of storylines. Obviously, the odd guy that you don't expect to score a goal, like Simon Benoit scoring an overtime goal, you get those kind of moments in the playoffs. But the stars are what tend to carry teams through rather. And maybe some people sleep on how big of a star or how impactful Kaprizov is. And if he's top 7, if that's in fact accurate, I mean, we should be expecting more out of the Wild than probably we have. And maybe maybe it all comes together. Like his health being in a good spot could allow them to go on a run. I mean, I think even winning one round is more than most people outside of their fan base probably were expecting when the playoffs began.
I don't hate that idea of thinking that Kirill Kaprizov could be top 7. I mean, remember, this dude missed half the regular season because of injury. And I think in that first half of the year, he was playing really well. I think if he had played a full season, we're thinking of the MVP candidates, guys like Connor Hellebuyck, Leon Draisaitl, Nikita Kucherov is there, Nathan McKinnon's considered, Cale Makar's considered. There's a world where Kirill Kaprizov is in that top 5. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that one day Kirill Kaprizov is in that top 7 of players as has been classified. Right now, maybe the fact that he didn't play a full season will hurt him. But if he gets this series win over Vegas, and he's a big reason why, already 4 goals, 8 points in his first 4 games in this series, there's a world where we put on that respect. Remember that year when Florida made it to the Cup final and they didn't win it that year, but Matthew Tkachuk was baller throughout that playoff run. There was a world where I'm not sure where we would have had him before, but I know for me, I thought, hey, you know what? I think it's time we start thinking about Matthew Tkachuk as a top 5 player. Maybe not necessarily now, but it just playoff performances do so much to a player's reputation, and Kirill Kaprizov's in a position where he could do that for himself.
Agree 100%. You get paid for how you play in the regular season. You build your rep in the playoffs when you're doing it for free.
All right, let's get to a few of these questions before we wrap up here. Thank you to everyone who sends us questions for AskCJ. Benito the Basset Hound. I'm going to ask this question anyway, even though I know he's not going to get the answer he's expecting here. How are Chris and Julian enjoying the Battle of Ontario? How's your smack talk in the group chats? There's no smack talk going on in the group chats.
Well, not about the outcome of the games anyway. Any smack talk was just the normal nonsense that has been going on for 3-4 years that we've been doing the show together. But no, it's been fun. And, had a little social time the other night. We're watching some games with some of the other reporters together at an establishment in Ottawa. It's been great. I mean, selfishly, that's kind of one of the fun parts about the series getting extended is we get a little bit more of that because it's amazing. Like a series happens when you're covering it, it happens very quickly. Because every day is kind of a work day, and obviously there's some travel. You're juggling a lot, and all of a sudden you're looking like, oh wow, it's already passed us by. So I want to savor these last few days together, buddy. Whichever way things go.
Me too, man. Like, I think it's super cool. I already admire the work that you do on a daily basis as an insider, but like to see you in scrums, to see you at games, and like not just like, oh, you work for another outlet and it's just cool because we work together, we do the podcast, but like we work on the same team. We're teammates. We've collabed on articles before, and we're constantly checking with each other to know what we're thinking in terms of storylines or articles we could write for the series. Like, that has been super cool to go through with you. And I feel the same way with Josh Cloak and Jonas Siegel, even though we haven't directly worked on something together. But like, to know that we have people on the ground on our side at The Athletic covering the hell out of this series, it's an honor to be a part of that coverage team and to work alongside with you. And like I told you this morning, I think of you as like Crosby, John Tavares, and it's a pleasure to get to work on your way.
Very kind of you to say. I don't know even how to respond, but you're the man.
Okay, next question. You don't even have to respond. Next question from Mac. I'm sure you can both answer this. Do teams travel by bus or plane for this series? I think they're referencing the Battle of Ontario. Well, I mean, that could go for any of these series, really. Do you think both that the very short commute between cities relative benefits the teams or hurts? Longer commute, more dedicated team time, and time to reflect post-game?
They travel by plane. I think one of the cool benefits is it actually allows both teams to be at home more. Like, the Leafs flew after Game 4 was played in Ottawa, so they would have got home late that night because always four periods were played. But they still slept in their own beds as of late Saturday, and then the next game isn't until Tuesday. Conversely, the Senators, can stay in Ottawa Sunday, can practice there Monday, and then it's basically like a 35-minute flight to fly to Toronto and play Tuesday's game. So, sometimes when I've covered series in the past, I mean, the extreme example is last year's Cup final, Edmonton and Florida. They stayed over after every game, even when it was traveling, and then they basically wasted or burned the whole next day traveling. That's not a concern here. But even when I've covered the Leafs in some of their Florida series, when it was the time to travel between games, they would stay an extra night in that city. And so, I don't know how it might affect the team dynamic. I think come playoffs, teams are together a lot as it is. And there's meetings every day. There's skates, there's some teams even stay. I'm not aware of anyone doing it yet in this year's playoffs, but some teams sometimes stay in a hotel, even in their own city, when it gets to an important part of a playoff series. So it's a long way of saying they travel first class, but the travel is one of the best parts of this series. It's so easy. There's lots of options, and we're a little less taxed ourselves as a result of that too.
One last question for you, Siege, from Rexy8319. This is also one I think we can both tackle. Have you heard if there are any Amazon face-off camera crews shadowing any players in the playoffs? Which ones? I know Brady Tkachuk for sure, who will be a part of season 2. He's definitely getting followed around by Amazon.
Yeah, they were at one of the games in Toronto for sure. Game 2, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I know there was at least one of the games. Well, I mean, I would imagine they're following him as closely as they can throughout this entirety of this series as well. But he's in season 2. He's getting followed by Amazon. They're definitely around.
Right. But I haven't heard the other list of names. Like, I don't know. Carolina, I think Seth Jarvis was announced. Like, a few players have been announced.
Yeah.
Sean Monahan was announced. Obviously, Columbus didn't make the playoffs. But so some of the storylines will be more focused on the stretch run and the run up to the playoffs. But I don't know which stars, if any, yet are having it done. Maybe they're going to wait to see which teams move on before embedding with some of those players. They're doing it a little differently this year, but they had more runway to do it too. And I think they have the experience of last year. So we're not holding out on you, but I don't actually have any names that haven't been announced yet. I don't have any knowledge of anyone else participating at this point.
And I'm sure once we get those names, we'll talk about it on another edition of the CJ Show, which thank you so much for tapping into this one. We'll be back later this week with a brand new episode, and we'll have more coverage of the Stanley Cup playoffs as they continue. CJ, great work as always.
Thanks, bud. And rest up. We got a big game 5 here. Hydrate.
Oh, I will. I absolutely will. Peace, guys.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.